anni fa. Hello, everyone.
Yeah.
Welcome to the C7 parallel session on civil society's vital role in conflict resolution in Israel-Palestine, pre, post, and during the current crisis. So this session will focus on the discussions of the roles of civil society, organizations in conflict resolution, and the attainment of sustainable and just peace in the current situation in the Israel-Palestine. While much of the attention is on the immediate ceasefire and global solidarity actions, long-term peace is not attainable without the involvement of local civil society. In this session, we will hear directly from Israeli and Palestinian civil society activists and have an open question and answer session with them afterwards. Before we start, we would like to establish some shared values here in this room. We hope that everyone will remain respectful and keep this place a safe place for everyone. We have one common goal here, and that is to find alternatives and strategies for peace and conflict resolution in the current crisis. We hope to explore solutions and recommendations with all the peace builders in this room and joining us online on what we can do and what we can recommend to our states in ahead of the G7 summit. So this session is not meant to criticize or scrutinize all the ongoing different actions happening worldwide. Instead, we aim to bring all those voices together and have meaningful discussions and actionable strategies for conflict resolution that we can work together. So to begin this session, we request everyone to take a 10-second moment of silence to remember our fellow peace workers who lost their lives in the course of aiding and promoting peace in Gaza. We also remember the lives of children and all life forms that were taken away. We also remember the mark of Nakba Day tomorrow, May 15th, and all the loved ones and unsung heroes of this remarkable day. We remember all those Israelis and Palestinians and all who have sacrificed their lives for working for just and sustainable peace in this region. Thank you everyone for your cooperation. We're now ready to begin our session. To kickstart this session, let us watch first the video message from Ms. Joanne Barrett, the Head of Regional Affairs Unit of UNSCO, the Office of the United Nations Special Coordinator for the Middle East Peace Process. The UNSCO represents the Secretary General and spearheads UN efforts in political and diplomatic endeavors, including with the Middle East Quartet. It also coordinates humanitarian and developmental initiatives of UN agencies in the occupied Palestine territory, supporting the Palestinian Authority and people. Let's watch this video.
It is an honor for me to be here with you today at the C7 Summit, if only virtually, and to address you on behalf of the UN Special Coordinator for the Middle East Peace Process, Mr. Tor Wennesland. Thank you very much for inviting us to be part of this very important event. UNSCO has long valued its engagement with civil society and with the peace-building community in particular. Today's event, with panelists from Palestinian and Israeli organizations working for peace, is admirable and significant now more than ever. I welcome their participation during this difficult time, and I cannot tell you how encouraging and inspiring it is, especially during these dark days of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, to see that you, as are we at UNSCO, remain committed to achieving peace. I have been with UNSCO for nearly a decade, working side by side with the Special Coordinator in support of Israeli-Palestinian peace efforts. Over this time, I've had the opportunity to become familiar with the initiatives and activities, with the accomplishments, and the many, many challenges that peace builders in this conflict face. These past 7 months have unfortunately presented all those who work for peace with an unprecedented challenge. Palestinians and Israelis are going through the hardest of times, grappling with profound grief, uncertainty, and fear as violence escalates all around them. Every day, Palestinians in Gaza face an unfolding tragedy of destruction, displacement, and loss amid a deepening humanitarian crisis, even as they await an anticipated, full-fledged Israeli military campaign in Rafah that threatens to wreak even more havoc, devastation, and cause even thousands more deaths. Israeli families desperately await the release of hostages held in dire conditions in Gaza as the country itself deals with its collective trauma over the brutal Hamas attacks of the 7th of October. Meanwhile, violence has also been rising in the West Bank, where Israeli security forces step up operations, particularly in refugee camps in the northern West Bank. And as the numbers of attacks by settlers against Palestinians and Palestinians against Israelis reach records not seen in over a decade. And at the same time, the risk of a regional escalation with untold consequences continues to instill fear and uncertainty for all of us. Much of UNSCO's work during this period has focused on supporting ongoing efforts to achieve a ceasefire hostage deal, de-escalating the situation in the West Bank, and preventing spillover across the region. I have often referred to UNSCO's work over the years as trying to stop up holes in the dam to prevent the flood that would wash away all hopes for the future. But now we are facing too many holes with too few fingers. Our UN colleagues have been working around the clock to address the humanitarian crisis in Gaza and to engage with the parties and with the international community to urgently increase aid into the Strip. The need for a deal that will bring a humanitarian ceasefire and the release of all hostages is urgent. Humanitarian aid must be increased significantly and immediately. But as you all know, addressing the emergency in Gaza is only the first step that needs to be taken as part of a strategic solution that will ensure the long-term security and fulfill the national aspirations of both Israelis and Palestinians. We must find a way to restore the political horizon and move towards the only viable possibility for a peaceful future, a two-state solution with Gaza as an integral part of an independent Palestinian state, living side by side with Israel in peace and security, in line with the UN resolutions, international law, and previous agreements that have long shaped our vision of that peaceful future. I cannot stress enough how absolutely crucial is the involvement of civil society to such political and diplomatic efforts. Civil society plays a significant role in creating the space for moving forward through dialogue rather than violence. Your activities serve as the platform, a vital platform, for fostering empathy, for building bridges, and for taking action to advance peace. We in the diplomatic community also have a responsibility, the responsibility to ensure that your views, experiences, and ideas are heard, shared, and taken into account. Your work is essential to creating a shared future for Israelis and Palestinians, a future based on mutual respect, a rejection of violence, and the recognition that both Israelis and Palestinians have a deep and undeniable bond to this place, with a right to live here in freedom and security. I can assure you that we in the United Nations always stand ready to support the brave women and men who continue to fight for peace, and that we will continue to do all we can to amplify your voices, the precious voices of peace. Thank you very much, and I wish you a very successful conference.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Joanne Barrett, for that message. And to further offer us the perspective on the pressing humanitarian circumstances in Gaza, we're joined by Mr. Jeremy Wellard, who serves as the head of humanitarian coordination of the International Council for Voluntary Agencies. Jeremy?
Thank you, Michelle, and good afternoon to all of you. I'm not here today as a peace-building professional but I've been invited as co-lead of the Civil 7 Working Group on Principled Humanitarian Assistance to speak about the shocking humanitarian context we are facing. And the intention of my intervention is to emphasize that this horrific, terrible situation in Gaza, as in so many others worldwide, the efforts of humanitarians are simply unable to cope with the levels of need and the impunity of states and other authorities and parties in their conduct of hostilities. It falls, as always, to those actors willing to engage on peace processes and civil society-led political solutions to make things really change. And until then, all we can say is that as humanitarians, we will try to do what we can in ever-shrinking spaces to save who and what can be saved. Many senior officials from civil society, from the UN, from states have recently said, Gaza is hell on earth. And I would disagree with the previous speaker from UNSCO. This crisis is not deepening. This crisis is plunging headlong into the abyss. Civilians in Gaza are being killed in shocking numbers, often indiscriminately and without precaution. By official counts, more than 35,000 children, women, men, older people, young people, entire families, those seeking assistance and those simply trying to survive have been killed. More than 200 humanitarian workers of the thousands that continue to try to deliver assistance in these most difficult circumstances have been killed. At home, at work, and even as recently as yesterday, while on the roads, trying to reach desperate people in need. The failure of all parties to create the conditions for safe delivery of assistance is costing lives and the futures of some of the most at-risk people in the world. In particular, independent media investigations and NGO research clearly show that Israel's conduct has consistently and directly impeded humanitarian operations within Gaza. Decisions have been made to block legitimate relief operations and resisting operational measures that would genuinely enhance the flow of humanitarian aid into Gaza. International actors have resorted to unprecedented means, laughably inadequate measures such as airdrops and floating piers, to try in vain to overcome these blockages, and this is quite simply not working. People in Gaza are being forced into famine. They have almost no drinkable water. The health system has been systematically destroyed. Water, electricity, and fuel are blockaded. We are all bearing witness to the complete disregard, and may we even say the active dismantling of international humanitarian law, international norms, and humanitarian principles, as you heard my colleague speak about earlier today. This is happening with the explicit and implicit support of the same states, including G7 states, that are the major humanitarian donors. So there is no humanitarian alternative for the people of Gaza. There is nothing left for them except a cessation or a resolution of hostilities. The damage done may already be irreparable, as may the damage that has been done to humanitarianism and the ideal of a world where inhumanity is condemned and kept in check. Humanitarians have no answers in this crisis. And I wish we could say to the G7 members that we will depend on you, but we clearly cannot. I truly hope that the answers lie with others, including those we will hear from today. Thank you.
Thank you, Jeremy, for that very compelling message on what's really happening, the urgency of the need in Israel and specifically in Gaza. And we have to acknowledge that even before October 7, we have witnessed mobilizations and uprisings of various civil societies, peace builders, aiming to build peace in Israel and Palestine. And to provide us a highlight on the importance of the global civil society and emphasizing the voices of the local civil society, we welcome Sean Connor, the Executive Director of International Peace Bureau.
Thank you. So for those who may be unfamiliar with the International Peace Bureau, we are a network of peace and peace-related organizations. We have members in over 100 countries around the globe, and most of our members at this moment are concerned solely about this humanitarian situation in Gaza and finding a ceasefire, finding long-term solutions for the region. And this includes, of course, in all of the G7 countries, strong movements for an immediate ceasefire and for long-term solutions that ensure the common security of both Israelis and Palestinians. This is not easy to do, and while they're doing this across the globe, civil society is actively engaging in and working for this. At the end of the day, the ceasefire can only come from the immediate parties to the conflict. Whether it be, in the US, my home country, for example, stopping arms transfers to Israel. Israel has said it will continue its operations even without those arms there. So we cannot solve this problem without relying on our colleagues, our friends, and those who are doing the hard work in Israel and Palestine. The current situation, I think we know, and it's been this way for a long time, is one of extreme polarization, one of subjugation of the Palestinians to the Israeli state. But despite these tensions, despite the difficulties in bringing these groups together, there are civil society groups that are finding the common ground, including in mourning, in grieving the losses of their people, and in sharing in their fears and insecurities of them and their families' lives at threat. And in this, there's a process of listening and learning from one another and coming together and finding common ground in that we are more similar than we are different. And this is something I think that's quite inspiring also when we look at international civil society, where we see international civil society is also being polarized, where you're either with one side or the other, you're pro one side or the other, and pro-peace is where we should all be, regardless. And so there is a process of learning and listening to what these local activists are doing, and using that as an example, we can on one level emulate on the international level, and on the other level, we can raise their voices up to, first of all, make sure those local accounts are being heard by everyone, all the decision makers across the world, that they are hearing the voices of the people who are on the ground suffering. And of course, this is a process where these local civil society leaders and organizations, they've been doing this long before the world's attention was on Gaza, and they'll be doing it long after. So these are the people who are working day in, day out, day after day, night after night, to find solutions to make themselves safe. They're the ones who can ensure that when a ceasefire comes, and it must come, and when the discussion shifts to longer-term solutions, they can lead those discussions. They are the ones that can ensure restorative and transformative justice for the region, so that nothing like what we're seeing in Gaza now will happen again. And it's only through listening to these people we can do it. No government deal will ensure that. Only the discussions of the peoples within societies can do that. So without further ado, then, I would like to turn back to Michelle, who will then introduce our speakers who sadly could not be with us today, but are online and will be also open to questions.
Thank you, Sean. And today we're grateful to have the representatives of one of the leading voices in building cooperation, justice, equality, shared society, mutual understanding, and peace among hundreds of thousands of Palestinians and Israelis and 160 organizations, the Alliance for Middle East Peace, ALMEP, to provide us with an overview of the civil society peace-building field in Israel and Palestine. We will have Ms. Rachel Lees from ALMEP. Rachel?
Hi, Michelle. Hi, everyone. Thanks so much. So yeah, as Sean was saying, just to kind of now focus on the local peace building community, ALMEP, the Alliance for Middle East Peace, is an alliance, a network of Israeli and Palestinian civil society peace builders with over 160 groups in Israel and Palestine that are working in all sectors of society. So we have member organizations focusing on health, on education, on interfaith work, on tech, on the environment. And now with the humanitarian crisis that Jeremy outlined earlier, our members have also switched to more urgent humanitarian actions as well. And so this network is extremely diverse, operating in all of these key areas of society. But importantly, the work they do is based on cooperation, on coexistence, and in some way bringing Israelis and Palestinians and/or Jews and Arabs together. And so together, all of these organizations create this peace-building field, this critical mass that are pushing towards peace and that are creating the grassroots movement, the base that can build, support, and sustain peace. So at OLMEP, we sort of have two core strands, two core focuses. One, which is very much based in the region. So we have our regional team. We're working directly with all of our members and with the goal to try and strengthen the field and increase cooperation among peace builders. And in a minute, you'll hear from our regional director, Naveen Sanduka, who can tell you more about that. But secondly, internationally, we discuss this work with governments around the world, advocating to governments to make sure that the work of this field is being acknowledged, is being supported, and importantly, is being incorporated into the discussions that are currently taking place on the day after on sustainable peace. So the two main points that we're really trying to highlight at the moment that are really based on lessons that we've learned from the past, whether that's failures like Oslo or successes in other contexts, like in Northern Ireland and the Good Friday Agreement with the International Fund for Ireland, that have shown us that any meaningful process must include both multilateralism and a bottom-up strategy that can bridge the gap in trust when it comes to this often controversial idea of peace or of engaging with the other. So at the G7 this year, our members have actually written a letter to the G7 heads of government, which we'll be sending to them in the next few days, that calls on the G7 to address the Israeli-Palestinian conflict in a more comprehensive way than we have seen attempted previously, and urging them to include language in the leaders' communique highlighting the importance of civil society peace-building work as an integral part of any viable peace process to end the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. And we're actually also asking other civil society organizations who stand in solidarity with this community to sign this letter alongside our members. So if tech willing, I might post a link in the chat, or I can communicate it to everyone afterwards via email for any other organizations who would like to sign the letter that will then be sending to the G7 Sherpas and heads of government. And so I really appreciate everyone being here and hoping that this year at the G7, we really see the inclusion of what has been missing from past peace talks and diplomatic processes, the inclusion of civil society peace building.
Thank you, Rachel, for sharing with us your very inspirational work that you've been doing with OLMEP, especially in this current crisis that we're facing right now. And now we're going to introduce with you the two activists from Israel and Palestine who will share their experiences with us in their country. And while they're sharing their stories with us, you can also start thinking about the questions that you would like to ask with our speakers today. And afterwards, we'll have the Q&A. So let me introduce first the first speaker. First, we will have Mr. Eran Nisan. He is from Israeli civil society, the political situation, the left. He is the CEO of Mezakim, and I said again, Israeli Jewish peace activist. Eran Nisan is an Israeli peace activist based in Jaffa. He currently serves as the CEO of Mezakim, an Israeli progressive movement. So Eran served as a combat soldier in the special forces of the Israeli military. And after his release, he decided to promote a peaceful resolution to the Palestinian-Israeli conflict. Eran's political motivation is generational, as he believes that a conflict we pass on to our children is a conflict we lost. Eran headed the Education and Advocacy Department in Peace Now, one of Israel's biggest and oldest peace movement advocating for the two-state solution. Eran is also the Israeli regional coordinator for both Solutions Not Sites, a British education program for British youth, which centers the voices on stories of Israeli and Palestinian change makers, and New Story Leadership, which focus on equipping a new generation of Palestinian and Israeli leaders with the tools needed to create social, economic, and political change in the region. Eran also holds a Bachelor of Arts in Political Science and Philosophy and a Master of Arts in Emergency and Disaster Management. Eran is also a certified dog trainer and a volunteer of emergency medical team and ambulance driver. So let's welcome the floor to Mr. Eran. Eran, he will joining us by online as well.
Hi, Michelle. Hi, everyone. I hope that you can see me. I'm looking forward to for the discussion and your questions. So I want to take this couple of minutes to talk about the role, as I see it, of civil society. I want to talk about the problems, or I would like to imagine them as barriers, because right now we have a lot of barriers. The first kind of barrier is the physical barriers. We have fences and walls and checkpoints that prevent us from meeting each other. And it didn't used to be like that. So before the second Intifada, the Intifada being the Palestinian uprising against the Israeli occupation, Israelis and Palestinians used to meet. My parents' generation used to travel into Palestinian cities. Even in Gaza, before the siege, Israelis and Palestinians would meet. And when they had an opportunity to meet each other, even though it was under the circumstances of a military occupation, of oppression, of discrimination, the day-to-day encounter allowed people to develop empathy. The second kind of barriers are language barriers. So my father, my dad, he was born in Iran. He grew up in Iran until he was 18. His parents, my grandparents, are Iraqi Jews who fled Baghdad in the 1940s after a lot of Arab-speaking countries became a very unsafe place for Jewish people. So my grandparents, they spoke Arabic fluent, and my dad spoke to my grandparents Arabic fluent. But right now, in my generation, less than 5% of Israeli Jews can hold a conversation in Arabic. And when we don't have the ability to communicate, not just on Instagram and TikTok to watch content, but also to have a conversation in Jaffa or in Jerusalem or in Haifa, this also brings us more and more apart. The last sort or kind of barrier is the narrative barrier. I was born and raised in Israel. I'm a product of the Israeli education system. And in Israel, you only learn one narrative. In civic studies, in geography, in history, the maps that are hung on walls in Israeli classrooms show only one state, one country in the region. We don't learn about the Nakba. We don't learn about Palestinians. We don't learn about the occupation. And when you grow up in a uninational with one simple, narrow narrative, it affects you, your political outlook, your political identity, and how you analyze things that are happening around you. Now, today, I don't know if you know this, but Israel is celebrating its Independence Day. And tomorrow we will commemorate the Nakba, the catastrophe, the disaster of the Palestinian people. Now, for me, as an Israeli Jewish peace activist, the idea of the State of Israel was to allow Jews from all around the world to have three simple things: self-determination, freedom, and safety. And I realize now, and I want to emphasize that not just Israelis, but Jews will never have the ability to have real self-determination or true freedom or true security and safety until the Palestinians will have the same thing: self-determination, safety, and freedom. We will never be free until the Palestinians will be free. Now, going back to the barriers that we need to break. Right now, the Israeli and Palestinian, with the support of the global civil society, are the only forces, the only actors that are working to penetrate and taking down these barriers. The only place that young Israelis and Palestinians can meet today in a physical space is through civil society programs. The only organizations that are teaching Hebrew to Palestinians and teaching Arabic to Israeli Jews are civil society organizations who identified this urgent need. this realization that when you talk to someone in a language they understand, it goes to their head. But when you talk to them in their mother tongue, it goes to their heart. And the only circles and arenas and spaces when you can be exposed and learn about the other side's narrative is through civil society programs, through cultural, art, and education. The only actors are corrupt leadership has failed us in thinking about a vision that is long-term, that is sustainable, that identifies that we need to share our homeland, Israelis and Palestinians. And right now, not just the avant-garde, not just the people who are on the front lines, sometimes literally on the front lines of being exposed to harm, are civil society actors. And to ignore civil society as the central piece of peace building is not just misconduct, not just an oversight, but actual a crime against future generations. My role as an Israeli citizen is to be part of what we call the co-resistance, the Israeli and Palestinian co-resistance that is working in order to ensure that every Israeli and Palestinian can enjoy a life of dignity, of safety, of security, of self-determination. So I'm gonna stop here. And I really urge you to think about questions and to let your curiosity lead you. Thank you.
Thank you, Eran. And for our second speaker that we'll have Nivine Sanduka from Almap, and a Palestinian from East Jerusalem who will share with us the local peace building field, difficulties, and the role of women and peace building. Nivine is Almap's regional director based in East Jerusalem. She's leading in the field of peace programming and gender mainstreaming. Previously, she worked with the German Association for Development Cooperation, AGIA Mondo, as well as Oxfam, CARE International, IPCRI, Israel-Palestine Creative Regional Initiatives and ROPES. She founded Judy, From Me to You, that aims to connect women and volunteers in several civil society organizations, and is on the board of Jerusalem Center for Women. She holds a Master of Arts in Democracy and Human Rights and regularly speaks at major conferences and international media on the current crisis and the role of women and youth in East Jerusalem. Nivine, she's joined with us online.
Thank you very much for this introduction. And as you can see, my cat is insisting to sit on my laptop. So I'm sorry for that interruption. So thank you so much for this opportunity. Actually, it's not easy to talk to you today as a Palestinian peace activist amidst everything that is happening in Gaza and the ongoing war. At the same time, it's not to be taken for granted that there is an Israeli and a Palestinian peace builder who are actually willing to talk together about the shared vision that we have. Thank you for that kind introduction. And I think what I wanted to basically talk about is that this war, especially as a Palestinian, did not start on the 7th of October. What the 7th of October actually did is that it brought the worst nightmares of both the Israelis and Palestinians into reality. The Israelis felt that they are reliving the trauma of the Holocaust, while the Palestinians, and up until today, we felt that the Nakba, or catastrophe, never really ended. And it is still ongoing, maybe with different colors, colored pictures, but it's the same pictures that we saw 75 years ago. So with this inherited trauma, we also believe right now, and the 7th was a testimonial to this, that the status quo is not sustainable. It felt comfortable for a while. It felt that the international community did not have a need to basically focus on the Israeli-Palestinian conflict anymore, rather than leave it and let it be, because it was comfortable. But the 7th of October proved us all wrong. There is a need to stop managing this conflict and to actually try to find a solution through a negotiated agreement, the multilateral process. But at this time, we need to also consider civil society. Why do we need to consider civil society? Because basically, this is the place where right now, as a Palestinian woman, I find my voice to be heard. The voice that doesn't necessarily means it is a violent voice, but it's actually a voice of pro-peace, shared vision, and a better future for my son, but also all the children of the region as well. A voice that looks that we want to live a better life specifically, and a normal life, as much as what that means. When I travel, and I was with Iran last week in Sweden doing some advocacy work, it felt weird. To have a normal life felt weird. To not to be worried all the time that you're going to be attacked because you are of a certain identity felt strange. And that strange feeling is what we are yearning for, that sense of normalcy. And that's why we are working in civil society and doing the work that we do. I cannot talk right now a lot about the Palestinian civil society because it will take us some time to dig a little bit deeper into what's happening in the West Bank and in the Palestinian civil society in Gaza and the one in East Jerusalem and the Palestinians within Israeli citizenship, but also the peace builders in Israel as well. It's going to take us some time. But what I want to say is that we all share a common goal, that we all want to be part of the solution and not part of the problem. We are offering that space for young people to be heard, for cultivating the future leadership that is not a radical leadership, but also the space where we know we have a vision and we can shape that vision. And I'll stop there, and I'm looking forward for the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Nivine, and thank you, Eran, earlier for sharing your experiences. For sure, our audience here in this room and online would like to learn more about your experiences and regarding the role of civil society and the young people towards this current crisis in Israel and Palestine. So let me start the ball rolling of asking the questions first, and then we'll turn over to the participants that we have now. So for our two speakers, my first two questions for you is that how can local Israel and Palestine civil society work with international civil society to amplify its efforts and influence national opinion in countries that maintain support for Israel amidst this conflict, or countries supplying resources or arms on both sides? And second question, can you give us at least one or two best practices or actions that you have seen or observed so far done by civil society that brought positive transformation or change either globally or locally towards Israel-Palestine relations? Eran and Naveen?
Sure. So great questions. I think that I have one answer that can answer both questions. I think that one of the things that we can identify is that the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, in a lot of ways, is very similar to other conflicts. So Rachel mentioned the Northern Ireland conflict. We saw apartheid in South Africa. We saw a lot of conflicts that had specific properties like we see in Israel-Palestine, the involvement of religion, the involvement of national identity, how it plays into larger geopolitical struggles in the world. But I think that Israel and Palestine has also something more unique in a negative sense, that it was, and as we saw, especially in the last 7 months, it was exported to other countries, exported and exploited. And Israel-Palestine, and I don't see a lot of American universities that are polarized around the question of Russia and Ukraine. I don't see a lot of, we saw just Eurovision last week. We saw how Israel-Palestine became something much bigger than Israel and Palestine itself. And not only that it was exported and exploited, it was politicized and weaponized. And it became something that is toxic in a lot of societies, as something that is polarizing and being used as a political battering ram. And that moves me into the incentive of local civil society, even if it's not around human rights and international law and about peace building. It's something of the government and civil societies in countries to deal with Israel and Palestine in a complex and nuanced way in order to disarm this toxic bomb that right now, or to put out the fire that right now is going inside a lot of capitals and cities around the world. And the way that Israeli and Palestinian local civil society can be connected to global civil society, and also that connects to the good practices that I have seen from my experience, I can sum up in a statement. And this is one of the takeaways that I would like to offer you in the audience sitting there today, which is don't talk about us without us. The opportunity to bring young Israelis and young Palestinians' voices and stories into Rome and Paris and London and Columbia University on campus, the way that I have seen how that it can disarm a very tension situation and atmosphere inside of a campus where you have a real Palestinian and a real Israeli even disagreeing, respectfully disagreeing, or having an argument or a discussion or a conversation that is nuanced. This is something that we need right now. We need more conversations with young Israelis and Palestinians, activists and peace builders inside those spaces around the world. And we need civil societies, global civil societies, assistance and help in providing those spaces, in giving us the opportunities to show that Nivin and I are not just colleagues and allies, but we're friends. We have the same goal. We have the same strategy. We are working together, and each of us brings their advantage into the conversation. So these are the practices, and this is also the really important alliance that we need to strengthen between local civil society and global civil society.
Thank you, Iran, for that. If I might also add to that, first of all, I think there's a common factor that holds all of civil society together across the globe, which is the international humanitarian law and the human rights law. This is the basics of everything. And if we actually agree to that, that's the common factor, then we can actually say, based on this shared values that we have, then what is the role of basically international civil society with the local civil society as well? And I think here there's a couple of things that we are expecting from the international civil society to play. First of all, to be partners, because sometimes it seems that there's some kind of exclusion of certain parts of the local civil society because we don't politically align, but we share the same values. So one of these roles that I would like to highlight is basically the accountability. I'd like to see international civil society play a more role in holding all governments accountable, specifically by reporting about what is going on here in both Palestine and in Israel. And the sources of these reports is basically the local civil society. And we are able to give evidence of what works and what doesn't work. And it should be taken upwards and amplified internationally. The other thing is to think together with the local civil society about the development the day after. What's going to happen? Who's going to fill in that vacuum that's basically being created, specifically in Gaza? Who is going to do all the work of reconciliation? Who is going to do all the work of building the bridges between two people who are extremely traumatized? Who is going to support us in the psychosocial work that we have to do? And that's all of it feeds into both the development and the humanitarian sector that we would like to be cooperating on. One very important thing, which I think also feeds into what Iran has mentioned, is all the advocacy efforts that you are doing here. So basically, if you look at the conflict, at the occupation, at the war in Gaza, it is spinning outwards, just as Iran mentioned, and it's being translated in the form of Islamophobia and anti-Semitism. And sometimes, unfortunately, people tend to take sides without really understanding the core issues of why are the people on the ground even fighting about. And even without understanding the narratives and without knowing that there is a shared vision that local people are actually talking about. And I would like the international community to help us in amplifying those voices, amplifying those approaches, and basically amplifying all the advocacy efforts that we are doing in making sure that this shared vision is actually heard, as well as the policies and recommendations that we would like to show. Very good examples that show, I think that feeds into the second question, that basically show how civil society locally was able to overcome many challenges ever since the 7th of October, when we saw civil society both in the shared community, which is Israeli and Palestinian, working together to immediately respond to the humanitarian crisis that occurred. We also see, as Rachel mentioned earlier on, many of our members, with the support of the international community, shifted their programs to basically provide clean water and sanitation material to Gaza, if they are able to bring it in, of course. So it's kind of like there should be all the time bridges between us and the international civil society. The international civil society cannot talk about us without us, exactly as Iran mentioned. We should be there. We are the ones who have the eyes and the ears on what's happening on the ground, but also we know what works and what doesn't work. And we know exactly that we need to go back to the core issue. Islamophobia and anti-Semitism in the world are symptoms of the core issue that is happening right now, which is Gaza, which is also a symptom of the occupation that's been ongoing for 50 years.
Thank you, Eran and Naveen, for sharing us your perspective on those questions. You'd like to emphasize from Eran's answer, don't talk about us without us. I think I couldn't emphasize that more, that we encourage to have those local voices really to be included on those platforms that whenever we talk about Israel and Palestine, and also from Naveen to emphasize that the international organizations to be partners in discussing this issue. That's why I think we're all here in this room to tackle this current crisis that we have right now. So for now, we're going to open the floor with our audience in this room and online. If you have questions, we can kindly raise your hand so I can acknowledge you, and we'll entertain first 3 questions here in this floor. Yes, please turn on your microphone, please. Thank you.
Thank you. I'm Marina Ponti from the UN SDG Action Campaign. First of all, I wanted to thank the speakers and you for this session. And my question is, by listening to this conversation, you gave me hope. You gave me hope because this is not something we watch on the news or we read in reports. So my question is, to them that you are experiencing, is this conversation being listened to by the leaders on both sides? Thank you.
Thank you for that question. We have another question from there. Yes, please. Yeah.
Thank you for all the speakers, but especially thank you to Naveen because she mentioned the international humanitarian law and the human rights law and accountability. And I want to ask the panelists here, do you think that sustainable peace and justice can happen without accountability or criminal accountability? So especially in Gaza, the crimes that has been committed are very visible to all of us. So it scares me if that was let go, then, because I live in a conflict zone in Yemen and parties to the conflict, they learn from each other. So if these crimes were let go in Gaza, it will just raise the bar for all parties to the conflict in the world to say that we can do this and it will be let go. Thank you.
Thank you. Would like to have one more question. Yes, sir.
Hi, hello. I would connect with she just said, in one side we can talk about accountability and justice, but I would also mention a word that Raquel, if I'm not wrong, mentioned is multilateralism. I think that we are experiencing firstly with the Ukraine-Russian conflict, but now the evidence of the crisis of multilateralism and how is needed a reform of the United Nations system. So I would ask to the panelists how they see in this crisis an opportunity for civil society to push for a reform that allows to be accountable if we violate the international law, international humanitarian law, and a system that really maintain an inclusive method to reach peace. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. I will give back the floor to our two speakers who are online. Yeah, and Naveen, yeah.
Okay.
Did you get all the questions?
Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you.
So I'll try to be brief. So first of all, right now, the current leadership is not listening. As I can say, as an Israeli citizen, my government is filled with criminals and bullies and fanatics and Jewish supremacists, people who not only they don't evaluate or consider humanitarian law or international law, but they don't even listen to their own citizens. We see it with the struggle to put a hostage deal and a ceasefire on the table. We see it is the constant attempt of Israeli civil society, not just left-wing civil society. We have seen this even before October 7th, where Israel witnessed an historic, unprecedented protest movement against an attempt by this current government to dismantle checks and balances and to create what we call the judicial overhaul. Right now, unfortunately, we need a different leadership. We need different leaders. The people who brought us into this disaster, and the disaster did not start on October 7th. We have seen government after government in the last decades. For me, as someone who my entire adult life, I have seen every time I went to vote, Benjamin Netanyahu formed the government except one time. And my brothers and sisters, my colleagues, my people, the members of my generation on the Palestinian side even didn't have even the opportunity to vote during their lifetime. So right now, our current leadership is failing us, and that's why we need the complementary international pressure. We need pressure from down. We need to sandwich our leaders. We need to bring pressure from the society and from the international community. To the second question, I want to commend the person who asked this question. I totally agree with you. People who commit crimes need to be accountable for them. And it's the international community's responsibility to protect people, human beings, and to uphold international humanitarian law. And if we want to see the pillars of reconciliation of peace, which are that we talked about transitional justice, about recognition and compensation and commemoration, the whole idea of peace processes are non-repetition. And if we want to see non-repetition, we need to hold those people accountable for their actions. And I can say that as an Israeli citizen, my government action violates international humanitarian law, and the international community is failing in protecting the Palestinians in Gaza, the Palestinians in the West Bank from violent settler attacks, but also me as an Israeli citizen. International humanitarian law is being violated by my government as well as militant factions on the Palestinian side, and I see the international community commitment being empty words. And to the last question about multilateralism, Israelis and Palestinians need to be in the room. They need to lead the peace process. What we have seen the international community try and fail to do in other places in the world, but also in Israel and Palestine, is to try to take the role of architects. They're trying to externally maneuver and move pieces in order to create peace. And that failed, and that will fail again. And the role of the international community in Israel and Palestine should not be of architects, but of midwives, people who support the process, who are there to bring support and knowledge and expertise and legitimacy and incentives, but they need to support us in what we're trying to build right now.
If I might add to that, thanks Iran for also, I know it's not easy for you and as an Israeli to be saying and being so honest and putting a mirror as well to say exactly what's happening within the Israeli government. It's not easy. At the same thing, I think just to answer and to add another element of what's happening in Palestine, we didn't have democratic elections since 2006. So you can imagine that there's actually no space for Palestinian young people to be heard and to practice democracy, but also to have another younger leadership that is more connected to what's happening on the ground and who actually has a vision, who actually want to achieve that vision. So knowing that we don't have that democratic system, we don't have those elections. So basically, no, the politicians are not listening to what's happening at the level of the grassroots in Palestine. And I can use the word, it's being hijacked by the political factions, whether in Gaza or in the West Bank. Even though the authority in the West Bank does seem to always say that we want to have peaceful negotiations. But again, they're not being heard and they don't hear what is happening with the civil society as well. And that's why I think we need to hear a little bit, and that maybe takes me to the third question, hear what civil society is actually doing. And it needs a little bit of an international will, if I might say, to make sure that civil society is heard and included in any peace talks. We, specifically the peace-building civil society, we know exactly what it takes to bring Palestinians and Israelis together. We know how to discuss the narratives, but also build that shared future. We know the smaller policy changes that need to happen in order to have a sustainable peace for that agreement to sustain itself. And we take very good examples in what's happened around the world, especially in Northern Ireland, when civil society was strengthened and included in peace talks, that this peace still holds after the Friday Agreement. I also wanted to discuss the issue of accountability. I fully agree with everything that Iran said. And I think without accountability, we cannot have actual reconciliation as well. And we cannot talk about trust building either between the Palestinians and the Israelis. And I fully agree, and we always say this as well. This, what is happening right now, sets a precedent. If the people behind what's happening in Gaza are not held accountable, then the rest of the world is going to go into chaos, basically, because everybody can just run away with it, literally. And I think we have seen very good examples on how peace can hold itself when accountability and justice is actually takes course. Like in the previous Soviet Union, Sarajevo, Bosnia and Herzegovina, these places, that when there was accountability, actually, there was some kind of transitional justice that Iran spoke about, reconciliation, and later on peace actually felt that it is can be sustainable as well.
Thank you, Iran and Nevine, for the first three sets of questions. We couldn't emphasize more about the accountability. I think we all agreed that in the room. And if not, of course, we can talk about that as well. And also, we cannot emphasize more that there are so many uprisings and mobilizations that going worldwide, not even before the crisis happened. And we acknowledge all those efforts have been done by the grassroots level to be heard in international area and space like that we are having right now. And would like to ask for more questions from the group. We'll have another 3 sets of questions. First, we're going to have the lady from the back of this side. Yeah.
Okay. Hello, my name is Adeze, and I'm a global governance student at the University of Rome Tor Vergata. And I want to start by saying thank you to the panelists for your speeches. The question I wanted to ask was about the two-state solution, or the proposed coexistence of Palestine and Israel as two sovereign states. And it kind of leads on from the questions that were asked before, in the sense that how can this be brought about, and how can Palestinians receive reparations in the sense that they've been displaced from their land, especially considering that a two-state solution would have the issue of the imbalance of power between the two states if things were to remain as they are. So what solutions do you suggest, basically?
Thank you so much to the two speakers and for providing nuance and clarity on some quite things that we haven't had in the past. I think my question to the two is, what is the place of global solidarity from not just accountability from global civil society, but what does that look like? But also the role of education given the misinformation around the conflict and many other issues, as well as solidarity across all conflicts globally, given that we need to have visibility and as much support for all of them. I think it will be really critical to hear that, and I've already had them express that amongst themselves, but also what does that look like at a global scale, both for all needed outcomes and for all needed calls to action. Thank you.
Thank you so much, and thank you, of course, to the panelists and for the organizers as well to create the space for this conversation and for having also Gaza and all Israeli and Palestinians in our hearts and minds during the summit. I guess it's a question, but it's not necessarily, it doesn't have necessarily an easy answer. I mean, I work for Climate Action Network. We have been in the climate space extremely shaken by the conflict. I think, all of those that believe in justice and rights come from a different trajectory. It was very clear for us, like international law, humanitarian law, all the things that Jeremy outlined so well, but we also realized that many in our movement or in the climate space were not necessarily making those connections. And I think we have to accept that there has been a moment over the past few months where that polarization that colleagues were referring to also clashed in our space with people that were just repeating over and over, this is not our problem, let's just stick to our GHG emission reductions, let's just stick to this thing because this is divisive. And I guess we are now in a moment where G7 countries are allowing a genocide, or at least not preventing a genocide, as the International Court of Justice is saying. I don't know where this ends. People were expressing their wish that we are going to be able to talk about reconstruction and rebuilding. Yes, one day that might come, but right now, this is not coming. And we are sending letters, and we are writing petitions, and we are putting statements out, and this is not working. And I have to say that I came here after several conversations yet again in the network about what do we do now as a climate movement. We are not the heart of this conflict. The heart, we can hear it. It's with the Palestinians, with the good heart Israelis, with you all in the humanitarian space. But I think for many of us in the margins, it's extremely difficult to figure out what else can we do. So, yeah, is there any expectation from us? I guess that would be my question. What do you expect from us all in civil society, we are not experts on this conflict? We don't necessarily master the language. We are just, all the time criticized by people saying, well, you're not expert here, you cannot really speak to this conflict. Yeah, what we must do, I guess.
Thank you for those excellent questions again for this round. Nevine and Eran, thoughts on these questions?
I can go first, Eran, this time. So listen, these are very difficult questions for me as a Palestinian to answer, I'll be honest. But I'll start with the two-state solution answer. We never got a state as a Palestinian. We were always under occupation. So what seemed to be as two states coexisting together is exactly what we used to call the status quo. And that's exactly why the world and the international community thought that they solved the issue and it's no longer an issue. You have Hamas governing Gaza, you have the Palestinian Authority governing the West Bank, a de facto annexation of the West Bank by the Israeli Authority and the government, and then you have Israel. And it seemed that because there is no violence, there is no blood being shed, even though there was violence and there was blood being shed, but not to the extent that the international community cares. Like there's a threshold that needs to happen for the international community to step in. And that's when the 7th of October happened. And that was the threshold that finally brought all the attention back to the conflict that is going on here. Now, the two-state solution is the best solution, also because according to different polls that are being conducted, the majority of people actually agree to the two-state solution. In Israel, Iran can talk more about it, but if it's only going to be a one state, according to polls, the younger people, the younger generation in Israel sees it as a one state with no equal rights. So it's not gonna be equal with between Palestinians and Israelis. The two-state solution is the only solution that basically meets the aspiration of both people. For the Palestinians, we are seeking this self-recognition of our identity, of our state and our rights. And for Israel, it means for them security as well, also security for the Palestinians these days. So it's the only solution. The other thing that we need to take into consideration, and I always like to refer to this as a good divorce between the Palestinians and the Israelis, because both peoples are extremely traumatized right now. And we need our time to do our own healing as Palestinians and the own time as Israelis to do their own healing as well. And that I'm sure that after doing this healing and the trust building process and the reconciliation, it's gonna take time. But by the end of it, we will learn how to share this space together. The other thing that I wanted to say maybe about the global solidarity, it's true, we have seen it, as I mentioned earlier, that the global solidarity spins itself out as anti-Semitism and Islamophobia, and it sometimes creates even more conflict rather than solving the original conflict that we are talking about here. And I think it's really important for global solidarity to kind of look and understand the narratives and why this conflict is even there. What do we mean by the word occupation? What is really happening in Gaza? Who are the different stakeholders that play here? Who are you able to really influence by this? And I think the biggest influence, which also maybe takes me to another point, the G7 and the international governments that are there. I think the most important thing that I'm expecting right now from the global solidarity is to put pressures on your government to make sure that they are pushing both the Palestinians and the Israelis to, first of all, of course, ceasefire, ending the war, but that is not enough. But also to go into a longer term process of negotiations to make sure that the Palestinians and the Israelis the self-determination, the peace and security is given to everybody. So that's really what I want you to do. Push your governments to do that. If you truly believe in a two-state solution, push your governments for recognition of Palestine in the UN. That's the very first step towards a two-state solution, because then we're talking about two equal states, not one state that is occupied and the other one is an occupier, as mentioned by the first question. It has to be kind of like asymmetry in powers as well, at least two countries talking together. And to be honest with you, I think we are here today because as a Palestinian, I'm expecting much more from the G7 countries. I'm expecting much more from everybody who was talking all the time about human rights and democracy values and international humanitarian law. And I've seen it step up in Ukraine against Russia or Russia against Ukraine, depends. So why is it not being held accountable when it comes to the Palestine-Israel question? I need you. I urge you as civil society activists, even the experts in the climate, even the experts in even students, to urge your governments, specifically the G7, to take a step and to add in their communique that they are taking the negotiations seriously and making sure that the peace activists, not necessarily activists, but at least the experts in peace building are part of that process, because we know what it takes to make it sustainable, and we know what the people are looking for as well. That's what I'm expecting from you as civil society.
I agree with everything that Niveen said. I want to try to answer the questions. Again, I'll try briefly. I'll start with the third question about climate. I think that climate activists can give us a lot of inspiration because after decades of trying to look at this hard border separation of Israelis and Palestinians, every time we had organizations like EcoPeace, which is an environment peace organization that is also trying to connect Jordan, Palestine, and Israel around water sharing and energy, and also thinking of a sustainable future. And this is the core of it, that climate activists, they understand that borders are a construct, and we need to look from political imagination, but also through policy, how we can create foundations that not only are sustainable and create a circular economy that are locally led and internationally supported and backed, but also that we drink the same water and we breathe the same air. And our future here in this land, when we talk about energy production and about food production and about human rights and sustainability, I think that in the climate arena, one of the big successes was to create a story that includes more people, that even the corn grower or the factory owner, when we're trying to recruit them, we can draw a picture of the future, that they have a place in it. And I think that this is something that we need. And of course, when we talk about incentives, we saw it through the pandemic that the diffusion, the movement of people between Gaza and Israel and the West Bank, between Israel and Palestine, but also in the region, no country here can isolate itself. And we need to stop thinking of hard borders and start thinking about a neighborhood and how we create good neighbors. The second question about global solidarity, I agree with everything that Niveen said, and my organization, our expertise is digital activism. And we see the spread of conspiracy theories and fake news, and it got to do with governments and international organizations taking an active role in suppressing and doing what we call pre-bunking and identifying those sources of hatred, of Islamophobia and anti-Semitism, and holding people accountable who spread fake news and conspiracy theories, as well as creating a more digital literate population around the world. And about the two-state solution, I want to connect all three questions. What we are missing right now is details. It's more language, because people say, especially politicians, they say the two-state solution is an empty statement. Some of them, from my experience, even do this when they say two-state solution. It's an empty vessel that we have the responsibility to fill with content. And it doesn't mean that people from around the world needs to say, no, the border needs to go through here or through there. This is the specifics that will be resolved in the negotiations. But we can have principles, values, guidelines. And I want to offer you 5 sets of principles that Israeli and Palestinian civil society peace builders have written together in the last 3 months. The first one is mutual recognition and acknowledgement. And it got to do with, I think, Adeze's question about reparation. When we talk about transitional justice, we can look at the, Resolution 194 about compensation to Palestinian refugees that were displaced. And we need to take that mutual recognition and acknowledgement, go into museums and streets names and school curriculums. This is mutual acknowledgement and recognition of each other's identity, past traumas, but also the psychological and historical connection to this land. The second one is equality and dignity. When we move forward with a two-state solution, any two-state solution that does not produce dignity, a life of dignity for Israelis and Palestinians, is not sustainable. So equality and dignity needs to be a part of the process, but also a part of the solution itself. The third one is security and safety. Sometimes people talk about security as an Israeli need and peace as a Palestinian need. And for me as an Israeli, I need peace, and Palestinians need security, because the lack of security for Palestinians is a lot of the driving force into extremism and into violence. So security and safety for everyone, this is something that we need to ensure. The fourth one is inclusion and agency. We have seen in past negotiations how it's always being led by old men in suits that are politicians. not just the absence of civil society, but the absence of women and youth. And I'm referring to 1325, but not only, to the need of including more voices. Even religious leaders can play a role in peace building. And the fifth one is trust through healing. We need to build inside our process the foundations of reconciliation and transitional justice. We cannot wait for an end of violence to start thinking about reconciliation. And lastly, when we talk about sustainable solutions, when we talk about how we imagine a future, we need to aspire more than a ceasefire. Because right now we had a war that started in 2023 and it will maybe hopefully end soon with a ceasefire. But we had a war in 2021 that ended with a ceasefire, and another war in 2014 that ended in a ceasefire, and another one in 2012 and in 2008. We have Gaza wars every couple of years, and every time it ends with a ceasefire. We have a responsibility, but also the capacity and the ability to imagine bigger and better than just a ceasefire, and to use all of our collective forces and energy and resources to make sure that this is the last war, that afterwards we will have peace.
Thank you, Eran and Naveen. I think it's an open invitation for everyone, us here in this room as well, that regardless of advocacy that we are doing, or regardless of our age, as many of in this room are currently young people, we can do something about it by just providing space and inviting those who are really want to talk about it, from the local civil organization. There are so many Israeli and Palestinian worldwide, everywhere, and we can invite them to talk in those spaces that we want to have. As Eran said, we're building a community, and we treat each other as neighbors, and as one community, we can work together. A community doesn't exist with only humanitarian work. We have to provide a sustainable communities for all of it. So we have also some questions online. I know our
Sorry,
time.
Michelle, can I just say something very quickly to that?
Yes,
Okay.
Naveen? Yeah.
Yes. I just want to add a very important part. Sorry that I cut you like that, but I felt like, in the heat of the moment. So basically, I just wanted to add to you something that I witnessed when there was a peace process between the Israelis and the Palestinians, when Oslo was held between Yasser Arafat and Yitzhak Rabin, and both of them put down the weapons, even though for each other they were considered as terrorists. And they were still put down their weapons, and they were able to shake hands with one another and bring peace. For my generation, we saw it happen, and we know it is possible. And I want the younger generation everywhere to imagine that it is possible, not to say that it is not possible because this is a terrorist or that is a terrorist. It is possible, and we lived it, and we want the world to imagine it as well, and to help us for a better future for our children.
Thank you, Naveen, for that additional. I've been working also in conflict areas, and in those conflict areas for so long time, there are so many children and families that been affected and suffering in those areas. But on all the more I work with them, the more inspiration I got as well, that peace is possible. They have dreams, they have hopes for the future, and as much as we are here in this room, we hope and we also advocate for a better future for them as well. So we have some questions online that we would like to entertain before we end these sessions as well. One question that we have, how can efforts to address socioeconomic grievances promote socioeconomic development and improve governance and rule of law contribute to building resilience and preventing the recurrence of conflicts in the Middle East? And can you describe the sentiments of society in Israel and Palestine? Has there been an audience within your societies that are willing to listen to your messages and engage? Is there a lot of pushback? That question is in just in one. And the last question, also, what do you see as the future outcomes that civil society can achieve together in this current crisis? And what policies should the G7 prioritize to address this current crisis? So, Naveen and Eran?
Go ahead.
No, it's okay. It's okay. It's yours.
Because there was like a multiple of questions in that question, but I want to answer one specific part of it, which is for the Palestinians. What are the incentives? And also, you know, if there's good governance and things like that, is that enough to basically stop a conflict, reoccurring conflict? So I think the core issue from a Palestinian perspective that we are talking about is the right of self-determination. Once we feel that we have a country and we're actually building that country on democratic bases, we have elections, we have good governance, we have good economy, our right as a Palestinian to exist is acknowledged. Our country is acknowledged. Our flag is not a source of, is not a threat anymore. And we have, you know, the right to use our resources, whether it is water, and we have accessibility through our borders as well. That is something that we want to keep, to sustain. That is not something that is we want to lose. It's kind of like after we achieve and attain our political rights, we want to keep them. We don't want to go into conflict again, basically. And that's the what do you want to call it? The guarantee for not reoccurring conflict again, which is against again that point that I was talking about. The status quo is not sustainable. The status quo, if it maintains, if we get a ceasefire and we stop the war, but without actually making sure that we go into negotiations and a peaceful resolution, what's going to happen is that we're going to see the 7th of October reoccurring again with a higher multitude and more frequent. That's why we kind of need to start with that political debate of what is the final status agreement that is going to satisfy both the Palestinian and the Israeli needs to that. There were some incentives actually put in place when we spoke about earlier on, specifically by Mr. Netanyahu, economic peace. There was a thought that if you give Palestinians jobs, permits to work in Israel, if you bring in more aid, humanitarian aid, or more development agencies, then the Palestinians are basically going to be okay with the status quo and okay with the de facto annexation that was going on and okay with the siege over Gaza. Well, it was not okay, because again, we are talking about the right of self-determination, the political rights. You cannot give me a job, a permit that you can control as Israel, and then you control my livelihood as a Palestinian. You cannot tell me I'm giving you economic opportunities while I cannot access 70% of the land in the West Bank. So it all starts back again to the political rights. This is the only incentives that we see right now. Once we get the political rights attained, then we can talk about the other incentives that come along with it and the trust building process as well.
So I'll try to answer the two questions. One about socioeconomic grievances. I think that right now what we see in Gaza is a horrible, tragic humanitarian crisis, but it didn't start on October 7th. Even before that, even through the lens of unemployment of youth, we have seen a very, very dire situation. What we need to bear in mind is what we don't want to see is the day after the war ends, international funds and resources and companies rush into Gaza to rebuild it and say to the Gazans or the Palestinians, stand aside, but while we, French and Dutch and American and British companies, will rebuild Gaza. We need to make sure also that I will say that Israel is also involved in the rebuilding of Gaza to create an incentive for non-repetition and also part of accountability and reconciliation, but also that Gazans are involved, not just involved as working force, low wages, but the expertise, the engineers, the architects, the urban planners. They are the ones that are closest to the problems, and sometimes those who are closest to problems have the sense of the solutions they need, but not having the agency or the resources to achieve it. So we want to create something that is like an outgoing spiral, that the people who are leading the rebuilding of Gaza are Gazans, and then Palestinians, and even Palestinian citizens of Israel, and then Palestinians from the diaspora, and then the regional countries, and then the international community. We need to create a funnel in order to create a socioeconomic, I will say, equity, not just equality, but also that this is a sustainable, legitimate process. Not that people are going to build buildings and then leave, and then in a couple of years we see the region spiraling back to violence. The second thing is about pushback. I can say that as an Israeli peace activist, one of the biggest problems that we had prior to October 7th was the apathy and indifference of Israelis. They would take to the streets on a weekly basis to defend their democracy, but they didn't want to hear about settler violence or the occupation or what's happening in Gaza. It was far from them, and it wasn't the most urgent or important thing for them. This has changed. October 7th, the tragedy of it, the illusion that not only we can manage the conflict, but the illusion that there is such thing as a status quo, because there is. Every day that passes, we see more settler violence in the West Bank. Every week that passes, we see more orphans and widows and bereaved families in Gaza, but also in Israel. Every day that passes, more children and babies are being born into this reality filled with destruction and hatred. This is not a static situation, a static reality. We are moving back, so we need to push harder forward. And I will say right now that the Israeli public, the mainstream, even people who identify as right-wing, are confused. They are broken, they are sad, they are angry, but they are confused because the fundamentals of how they analyzed reality and what they were being told by the Israeli leadership across the board found was a lie, that we can manage this conflict. And right now they're looking for solutions. They're looking for a political vision for the future. There is one of Jewish supremacy, of building settlements inside of Gaza, of ethnic cleansing, of crimes against humanity. And there's an opposing one of equality and a shared future. And right now there is a competition on the hearts and minds of this disillusioned electorate. So this is the pushback and the conversation that is now happening in Israel.
Iran, if I may add to that a little bit, maybe it's relevant to the questions or not, but you mentioned a very important point, which is the reconstruction of Gaza and running with the development aid and the humanitarian aid there. But I think we tend to forget what's going to happen with the people and the vacuum that's being created in Gaza, in a sense of not only leadership, but in a sense of rehabilitation of the humans in Gaza and rehabilitation of the humans also in the West Bank and in Israel as well, and in East Jerusalem. And I think that's the most important role for the civil society to play. So to provide that psychosocial healing that is very much needed, to take care of the more than 19,000 orphans that were, you know, I don't want to say the word created, but, you know, the orphans, the people that suddenly find themselves orphaned, 19,000, all the women who suddenly find themselves responsible for their own family in a sense of economic responsibility, but also social responsibility, all the schools that is not there, the education, and this vacuum can only be filled by civil society. Bringing in those experts, not only the local experts, but also the support of the international civil society who has worked in conflict areas before. And that's basically the kind of things that we would want to do. But there's another very important vacuum that we're talking about, that we don't want these younger generations who have witnessed this war to basically fall into radicalization again. And that circle of hatred and that circle of being easily manipulated to be able to hate the other to an extent that it's easy for you to kill the other side. And I think that's where we need to it's kind of twofold. One of them is basically the thing that I was talking about before, the right of self-determination, that, you know, at that level of political solution, but also the role of civil society to humanize one another, to create those bridges between Israelis and Palestinians, to have that dialogue, to recognize the narratives of one another, and basically that there is an opportunity for us to actually live together. And if we do have that kind of twofold thing from the political level, but also the civil society, we are working on a formula that is going to guarantee that any spoiler to that peace process is going to be rejected by both the Israeli and the Palestinian society. So that's something really important to consider when we talk about the roles and basically sometimes the incentives as well. The other thing, I think you mentioned earlier, a very important point, that when we talk about a two-state solution, it seems that we're talking it in a vacuum, and some politicians, as you said, do this. So I think it's important to look at what we also have. The peace-building community offers solutions to what a two-state solution actually means. We have a Land for All. It's an initiative that puts the steps forward. We have the Palestinian Peace Coalition. We have the Geneva Initiative, who have basically drafted what a two-state solution can look like and the steps towards that. The international community needs to look into what civil society can offer in that sense and take it, because we're not talking in a vacuum. There are initiatives in place that are designed by civil society, but we need the push and the adoption of the international community for that. And we also need to use maybe the Abraham Accords as well to bring in the Arab countries on board as an incentive. We're talking about incentives. The Arab countries is the biggest incentive for Israel right now. All the peace accords that were signed, the Abraham Accords, Arab countries can basically build on those to make sure that we have a two-state solution and to end the occupation and the conflict. The last thing that I wanted to say is the role of the media in all of this. Media tends to go when there is war, when there is blood spilled. They love it. And they love to talk more and make things even seem worse than they actually are, because it brings viewers. What we actually want is a media that focuses on peace-building initiatives, that talks about how Palestinians and Israelis are coming together, how there are demonstrations to end the occupation and to end the war on Gaza in Israel, actually, which you don't hear in the Israeli media and you don't hear in the international media, but they are there. Blood is not spilled over there, but they are there. So we need that media to basically be focusing a little bit more on the good things that are happening as a ray of hope as well, and something to look forward to build a future towards.
Thank you, Iran Ryan. We cannot thank you enough for being with us in this session. You inspired us. We know how challenging it is right now. Where are you with all the advocacies that you're doing right now? So to wrap up this session, could you just share us what motivates you in working for peace for Israel and Palestine, and any final messages for the civil society and peace builders who are with us right now? Just very quickly, and we'll wrap up this session. Thank you.
So I already started with don't talk about us without us, but someone mentioned hope, and hope is like a small candle. And when everything is bright and lighted, you don't see the candle, you don't need the candle, but where everything is dark, we need a candle. And right now, everything is dark, not just here, but around the world. Because of Israel-Palestine, we see a lot of darkness and a lot of depression and despair. But the antidote for despair is action. And the thing that you can do is take the small candles that we have here, the civil society candle, and make sure that is lit around the world. And in every dark room, you can light a candle of the experience that you had, the things that you heard here, this conversation, this conference, and you can help light up a lot of other rooms. So thank you for the opportunity. And again, bring young Israelis and Palestinians' voices and stories into the rooms where you conduct conversations about Israel and Palestine. It not only empowers us, it also inspires other people. Thank you.
Iran, what motivates you as a person who didn't see Oslo?
So don't take it to the wrong way, but like the fact that I grew up and I'm a peace activist because of my military service. And only after I was released from the army, I got the chance to have a meaningful conversation with Palestinians, and to find out that I have Palestinians that are working in Palestine that share my vision and my values and my conversation and my sense of humor and my pop culture references and everything. This gives me hope, because when I have difficult conversations with my community, with my family, my friends, and they ask me, what about the Palestinian peace activists? I can tell them about you and about our colleagues in the OMAP network, but also in the global network.
I think I wanted to say that answer. So I'll start with that point exactly. So it's actually that I am not alone in all of this, and I know that there are people who share with me the same vision. And as you said, there's a level of humanization between Israelis and Palestinians that gives you hope that this is possible. And together, when we stand together, we're standing against the apartheid, we're standing against the injustices, we're standing against the war, and it gives us such a strength and hope. At the same time, with my personal identity as a Palestinian woman, I see that what motivates me is basically this self-realization as a Palestinian woman who wants to have her voice heard in a political space where I don't have any other alternative. And that kind of gives me the push that there's no other alternative for this. The last thing that I wanted to say is that I am a mother, and being a mother who witnessed the first uprising in the 80s and a peace process in the 90s, and then the second uprising in 2000, and now multiple wars. My son is 13 years old, and I don't want him to keep living in this day in and day out. I want him to have the sense of normal life, which I spoke about at the beginning of this. That sense of normal life is what motivates me the most. I want my son to be able simply to ride his bicycle back and forth to school. Very simple thing. Or to be able to take the bus, go play football with his friends without me needing to worry whether there is going to be Israeli police or not in that football court. It's the simple things, but these simple things are the strongest motivations for us because we don't have any other alternative. And the alternative is exactly what is happening right now.
Thank you, Iran and Nevaya. Thank you so much.
And before I end in my quality of chair of Civil 7, I want to thank you, to thank all the panelists, to thank you who organized this parallel session for what you shared with us. We've been called, we've been asked to keep alive this small, maybe little, vulnerable, weak light or flame of hope. And I think that what we are here together is exactly this. That is, keeping this small little wake, all these our common weaknesses together to make them stronger, to be able to be heard at the service of the lost. Thank you, really, thank you to all the friends from the Middle East, or in Italy we always say the Holy Land, to share your words with us. I'm even moved in this moment, and again I repeat, thank you.